7:05 on TSN 690, Montreal Sports Authority. This is Game Points. I am your host, Matthew Ross. We're here till 8 o'clock this evening. Sean Coleman on the board, Mo Khan in studio, Stefano Micella helping us out. Our next guest is a former broadcaster here with the Montreal Expos, as some may remember. Also served time with the Boston Red Sox as well, including during the 2004 World Series championship season. You can follow him on twitter.com/Jerry Trupiano. It is Jerry Trupiano. Hey, Jerry, how you doing?
Good, Matthew. Yourself?
Good. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to do it. We had some good times there in Montreal.
I was going to say, so you, if I'm correct, spent a couple of seasons here. I remember listening, of course, a longtime Expos fan to the broadcasts, and you spent a couple of seasons here. Before we get to some of the memories, how did that come about? How did you end up here in Montreal?
I had applied for an opening with the New York Mets, and it was down to me and Gary Cohen, and they decided that Gary Cohen, who had been their AAA guy, that he was in the system already, that they would hire Gary. But apparently they thought enough of me that they contacted the Expos. The Expos were looking for somebody to replace Jim Fanning and to work with Dave Van Horn and Bobby Winkles. And they brought my name up, and I came up to interview with Claude Brochu and got the job. And we had a couple of great years there. I wish we could have stayed longer, but some family necessities caused us to move back to the States. If they would have let me live in the States like Dave and Winks and Kenny Singleton and take care of what we needed to do medically in the States, I would have stayed with the Expos forever.
Of course, you were there for the '89 season. Is that correct? As part of your tenure?
Yeah, and people thought that the Expos were going to win it that year, but the Chicago Cubs put a late push on, and I was told by some people in St. Louis that you guys are going to get a World Series ring this year, and that didn't turn out.
Yeah, that was a memorable season for many people. Obviously, there was a fledgling English newspaper here that was only around for a little bit. They were printing World Series T-shirts in the middle of the year, which is kind of odd. It was the year in which, of course, they went out and got Mark Langston and the Randy Johnson going the other way and all that kind of stuff. And it was the right move at the time when you're going for a championship, but it just absolutely collapsed in the final month of the season, didn't it?
Yeah, and Randy Johnson was not the Randy Johnson we saw later with Seattle. He had not put it together yet. And Mark Langston didn't want any part of Montreal. He didn't want to be there. And he was kind of surly all through the year, but he pitched pretty well at times, but at other times not so well. But the thing didn't work out. But Dave Dombrowski, took the shot, bringing Langston in. And while it didn't turn out, like you said, you got a chance to win. You had to go ahead and take that shot.
Chatting with Jerry Trupiano here on Game Points. In terms of your time here in Montreal, what do you remember about some of the good times in terms of whether it was rapport with some of the players or the city itself, etc.?
Oh, it was a fun time. I mean, from a player standpoint, when you got guys like Tom Foley and Spike Owen and Tim Wallach and Tim Raines and Dave Martinez and Mike Fitzgerald, Otis Nixon, and just a bunch of great guys. Bryn Smith was a good guy to be around. Watching Pascual Perez and his personal assistant trying to keep him out of trouble, that was something to behold. Remember Pascual going around in his Zorro cape and his Zorro hat? He was quite a character. So, there were a lot of good guys. Andy McGaffigan, who was out in the bullpen. Tim Burke, a classy guy. So many good guys there in the front office. They treated us well. I had wished that Charles Bronfman hadn't sold the club. Had he held on to the club, he was so turned off by the cost of player contracts and free agency and what have you. I think we would have had a longer run there if Charles, Mr. Bronfman, had held on to the team.
In terms of some of the other players, people associated with that organization, you mentioned Dave Van Horn, who, of course, went into the Hall of Fame with the Ford C. Frick Award. Your impressions of Dave?
Great guy. terrific broadcaster, a great partner, and the same with Bobby Winkles. Winks and I had a lot of fun too when Dave would go over to TV to work with Kenny Singleton. And the front office people, they were so nice too. From the secretaries to just people around the ballpark, they really made you feel at home, and it was a terrific organization. And I just wish that they had been able to hold on there and keep that franchise, but it didn't turn out that way, of course.
What are your thoughts on what we're seeing now the last couple of years in terms of, I'm not sure how much you followed from afar in terms of the momentum and the stories and all the things coming out of Montreal now, culminating, of course, with the 2 preseason games happening at the end of the month this month?
Yeah, I found it interesting that there's is it a drive on to bring baseball back, and what kind of momentum is going on there? I know when you hear down here in the States that the trouble that the Marlins have drawing, although they got the state to build them a new ballpark. The Tampa Bay Rays are as good a franchise as you'll find in Major League Baseball, but they play in a terrible ballpark and have trouble drawing fans. So there's always talk that maybe the Rays might relocate, but they say there's no places for them to move in North America other than Charlotte, North Carolina, or maybe Portland, Oregon. But now you hear Montreal's name popping up again, and what kind of momentum is going on there, and how realistic do you folks there think that it might be?
Well, it's difficult to tell, but you see a lot of interesting signs. The Apparel is top 5 in Major League Baseball right now. You're seeing we brought 1,000 fans, or an organization I was a part of brought 1,000 fans to Toronto last July, which made, of course, a lot of attention. The 94 Expos, almost the complete team, will be here at the end of the month as well as part of the Montreal Baseball Project's efforts led by former Expo Warren Cromartie, and they've been able to hold feasibility studies in conjunction with the Chamber of Commerce and Ernst & Young and a couple of heavyweights. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes jockeying and a lot of good sort of will, and you combine that with perhaps the media landscape as well, how that's changed over the last few months as well. So there's some interesting things going on, but it certainly comes down to playing somewhere feasible, and the Olympic Stadium is just not that place. You were not around, obviously, for some of the end of the franchise and
Right.
and the down times, but in 89, 90, was that Big O? I think it was roofless at that point, wasn't it?
They opened it a few times. I'm trying to remember if it was in 89 or 90, but one of those years they were able to open the roof a few nights or a few days, but it wasn't, to me, I don't recall it being open very often. And what's the facility like? Have they been able to keep it in good working order?
Well, that's the problem, Jerry, is the fans here know that place wasn't in great shape, as you know, back then. It's not state of the art, bad part of town, all that kind of stuff. So they're doing some work. There's a lot of renovations just to make it palatable for a couple of preseason games, but we'll see what comes of it. Chatting with Jerry Trupiano, broadcaster formerly with the Expos, Red Sox, and before we let you go, obviously part of that 04 season, that just must have been magical to be a part of things turning around, and of course that great comeback against the Yankees.
Yeah, and it was extra special for us because my wife and I are from St. Louis, and the great Jack Buck when I was a kid and a producer at the great station KMOX in St. Louis, he used to get me into a booth at Busch Stadium to practice, an empty booth to practice my play-by-play, and he would critique it. Well, in the postseason in Major League Baseball, if you're in your home park, home radio stays in their own booth, home TV goes to the Fox network, visiting TV goes to ESPN International. As I said, home radio stays in the home booth, visiting radio goes to ESPN Radio, and visiting radio goes to an auxiliary booth. Well, when we went to St. Louis, we had to go to the auxiliary booth, and wouldn't you know it, it turned out to be the booth I used to practice in as a kid. So got to do the World Series, clinch the World Series in the booth I used to practice in my hometown as a kid. So it kind of came full circle, and it was kind of a special treat for us, not only winning the World Series, but doing it in the park that you used to go to as a kid that you cut your teeth in trying to make it in the business. The only downside was the doggone World Series tickets were so expensive, both in Boston and in St. Louis, and with family in both locales. We took a little beating in the postseason.
Fair enough. Yeah, that must have been a mighty expensive ticket. Well, Jerry, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Jerry Trupiano on Twitter.com if you want to send him a message out there as well. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. All the best to all the folks there. Take care.
All right, there you go. That's Jerry Trupiano, former Montreal Expos broadcaster, and is certainly with the Boston Red Sox as well. It is Game Points here on TSN 690. Other side of the break, we're going to switch it up a little bit and talk NFL free agency as, there's always news going on in the NFL, isn't there? No offseason anymore. It's Game Points. That is up next.